Washington Film Festival. Over the decades, the Apollo Theater has served as a gathering place and an unofficial town hall for local community residents and people from across New York City. But this year, the continuing COVID-19 pandemic meant our celebration was virtual. And in some ways, it might feel impossible to fully celebrate Dr. King in a virtual environment. After all, the movement for racial justice and civil rights is truly a movement about being together. It's a movement marked by mass meetings in Southern churches. A movement we remember through images of marches where Dr. King linked arms with members of the communities where he worked. It's a movement where activists were beaten, bruised, and bloodied by state power that was anything but virtual. But the decision to go digital does honor another aspect of this movement, its creativity and collective action. Let's consider the Montgomery bus boycott, where Dr. King's leadership first gained national attention. For over a year, every single black person in the city of Montgomery, Alabama, refused to ride the segregated public buses. Every single person for more than a year. Now, this kind of collective action, it takes not only commitment and coordination, it also takes creativity. To organize a community-free taxi service, to determine new routes to school and work, to keep up the spirits of those involved, and ultimately to win the legal decision to desegregate. Indeed, one way to think of the movement for civil rights is as artistry, a complex composition played by multiple instruments of activism, a collage of resistance painting a new portrait of democratic possibility, a new story of America authored by all who worked and organized and sacrificed along with Dr. King. And thus, our special Uptown Hall MLK Activism in the Arts reveals the many ways the arts influenced the creative nonviolent resistance of Dr. King's activism. Now we start with the Honorable Andrew Young. Young served as mayor of Atlanta, a member of Congress from Georgia, and the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. But long before these official political roles, Andrew Young was executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and as head of the SCLC, he was a close friend and confidant of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Mr. Young, thank you for being here.
Well, it's my privilege.
So, Ambassador, I want to begin with the most personal, and then we can sort of expand out.
Help yourself.
But when you think about your experience with Dr. King, maybe less the notion of Dr. King as the movement activist leader, but more as the person. I've heard you at times talk about him joking and clowning and the ways that he engaged the people that he worked with. Can you reflect on Dr. King a bit for us?
The Royal Peacock on Auburn Avenue was where most of the blues and rock and roll and the old music, what they used to call the Chitlin Circuit. And so he'd have to pass there. He got along with everybody, and everybody knew who he was. It was easy for him. He could drop in any black community in America and carry on a conversation and be comfortable with all the folk that were hanging out, because he hung out on the streets. Everybody knew he was the people's face, and they treated him that way with great respect. And it was as though even growing up he was somebody special, because his father was not only the pastor of one of the largest churches, but his grandfather had been the pastor of the same church. So it was, he had a generational priority on Auburn Avenue. Auburn Avenue was also, in his time, where all of the soldiers that were in the South from all over the country. We had Fort Benning, 80 miles to the south, Fort Gillem, Fort McPherson. there were about 6 Army bases within 2 hours of Atlanta. And so on the weekends, Auburn Avenue until early Sunday morning belonged to the nightclubs and the soldiers. And then it was almost as when the sun came up, then that was God's territory and the churches took over. So he lived a full life with all kinds of wonderful people. And he loved them, he respected them, they knew who he was. And so anywhere we went, when you get on the main black street in the community, he was at home.
I love hearing these reflections. There are obviously so many images of Dr. King, but I will say my favorite photograph of him is of him in Chicago during the Chicago campaign, playing pool on the South Side. And there is something about seeing him in that relaxed atmosphere, seeing his humanity, his manhood, as you've described it, that all-American black boyhood, now manhood, even in the context of all the serious work he was doing.
Yeah. Well, but it was the seriousness of the work that came from the people on the streets that he grew up with. Like he used to quote this guy that used to hang outside the barbershop and play a guitar, and he had this song, "Been down so long that down don't bother me." And he'd sing it that way sometimes, and then the other times he would sing it, "Been down so long, getting up don't cross my mind." And he quoted from these blues singers off the street in his sermons, and he felt what they were talking about, and he knew that it was his challenge to get them to rise up, and we did.
What you've just done, I think, is so critical by linking that blues aesthetic in the context of the movement. It's not just that the arts fueled the movement, but the movement was itself a kind of art, right? That it was a lyric, it was a composition, it was bringing together these parts and understanding that you had, maybe upper middle class students, and you had, a 78-year-old fearless leader, right? Together in those moments.
Well, the only place we could meet was in the church. And before, usually the meeting started at 8 o'clock. Well, that meant that the preachers got there at 8 o'clock. The old folk came straight from work, or 5 or 6 o'clock. And they started moaning and singing these old long meter hymns and spirituals. And they sort of carried on. They got the church warmed up. Then around 6:30 or 7, the high school students came in and they started singing freedom songs and clapping their hands, and you had an integration of the generations every night in a church in Birmingham, Alabama, or in Selma, Alabama.
Ambassador, as we complete our interview, and thank you for your generosity with your time today, I'm wondering if you can just give us a word. I know many people in this moment, with the COVID pandemic, with the continuing divisions in our country, are feeling hopeless. What would be the lesson from the movement and from Dr. King that you might offer us about how to stay resilient and hopeful, even as we resist the worst impulses of our nation?
Well, I think that where we found our strength was in the heritage of our ancestors. That Martin, whenever, I mean, it could be anywhere in a message, he'd say things like, black men and women in slavery had more faith than people in the Old Testament. They straightened out Jeremiah's question mark into an exclamation point, because they didn't ask, is there a balm in Gilead? They said, there is a balm in Gilead. that heals a sin-sick soul. There's a balm in Gilead that makes the wounded whole. So when I get discouraged and think my work's in vain, then comes the Holy Spirit that revives my soul again. Because there is a balm in Gilead. And he just started preaching like that, sitting around in a hotel room. And the distance between his spiritual life and the movement was non-existent. The movement came out of his spiritual life. There was something in him that synthesized, like an orchestra conductor, the culture of the black church, black folk in the pool halls, people in the farms, and he did it with a rhythm that made you have to pat your feet and make you want to jump up and shout. And it was that affirmation of faith that got us through, as we say, many dangers, toils, and snares. I have already come. It was grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home.
The Honorable Andrew Young. Now we're going to take a quick break, but we have a lot more of these terrific conversations from our special MLK Day virtual event coming your way this hour, including artist Najee Dorsey, activist Rashad Robinson, author Jacqueline Woodson, and many more. This is a special takeaway presentation. We'll be right back.
BetterHelp, connecting people with a therapist can